Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Talent Management webinar, sponsored by Class Technologies. Hope everyone's having a great start to their week and excited as I am for today's webcast, Reskilling and Upskilling in a Hybrid World. My name is Steve, and as always, I'll be working in the background here to help answer any general or technical questions you may have. Before we begin, though, I would like to go over a few key reminders. First, there is no dial-in number for attendees. All audio will be streamed through your speakers or headphones, so please adjust your volume there accordingly. Now at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a variety of icons. You will have access to all these tools throughout today's session, so please feel free to customize your console however you would like. Among these tools, we have the attendee chat, ask a question, resources, and certifications. If you have any questions or experience any technical issues throughout this webcast today, please click on the purple icon marked Q&A, type the question in the box provided, and click Submit. If you have a technical question, the answer will appear here. Any content-related questions for our speakers today will be read throughout or at the end if time allows. The certification codes for this webinar will appear in the certification box located to the right of your slides once you have met the required watch time. Don't forget, you can chat with your fellow attendees by joining the live attendee chat. And finally, you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email, so please allow at least 24 hours after the conclusion of the event before the information is sent. And without wasting any more time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator for today's webcast. We have Ashley St. John, Chief Content Officer and Editor-in-Chief for Better Work Media Group. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Ashley to get us started. So go ahead, Ashley, take it away.
Thank you so much, Steve. Welcome, everyone, to today's discussion, Reskilling and Upskilling in a Hybrid World, the third in a four-part series sponsored by Class Technologies titled The Future Station. I'm Ashley St. John, Talent Management's Editor-in-Chief, and we're excited to kick off the conversation led by Ben Lowell of Class Technologies, focused on the realities, opportunities, and challenges of upskilling and reskilling efforts in remote and hybrid workforces. I don't want to take too much time away from today's discussion, and we'll be leaving some time for Q&A as well, so please be sure to share your questions with us as we go along. So without further ado, Ben, I'll pass the virtual mic over to you to introduce yourself and our speakers joining us today.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm excited to meet everyone, and I appreciate everybody for attending. My name's Ben Lowell from Class Technologies. Our company was founded during COVID, actually, and we have a software platform that is dedicated to allowing organizations and schools and educational institutions to function in a hybrid and remote workplace in a virtual classroom. So it's built for training and educating your population. So don't need to spend a whole lot of time on that, but what I would like to introduce our two speakers today. We have Stephanie Webb and Bob Tweedy. Stephanie is Vice President of Customer and Talent Enablement at Disco, and Bob Tweedy is VP of Leadership and Learning at Revantage, a Blackstone company. And without further ado, I'd like to just give each of them a chance to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background, and I'm going to say, let's see if we can cap that around 60 seconds. Stephanie, let's have you go first. Tell us a little bit about your background, and we'll see. We'll see if we can do a 60-second.
The first challenge has been issued, 60 seconds. All right. So I'm Stephanie. I lead customer talent enablement at a legal technology company in Austin, Texas. What customer and talent enablement means is that I lead the team that's building Disco University for all audiences, internal and external, our partners, our customers, and our employees. My background is I come from the world of management consulting, worked for a few different consulting firms, served internal and external clients across geographies and across industries. And then one day, about 6 years ago, I fell in love with the world of technology startups after I moved to Austin, Texas. So now I spend my time starting up learning and development functions for technology companies. And Bob and I, who I volunteered to do this with me, worked together for Deloitte for many, many years.
Wow, that was actually, I think,
was
under
that
60
seconds?
Well done.
Yes.
Yeah, Stephanie, great work. Bob, let's hand it off to you. See if you can beat her.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Stephanie. It's fantastic to be here. Thanks for the invite. I just wish this was in person, but obviously COVID had other thoughts for us. It's great to be here today by way of background, I'm from the UK, Scotland originally, lived there 20-something years, lived in France for 16 plus years. Now I'm based here in Chicago. I work for a company called Revantage. Revantage is a shared service company that supports Blackstone's real estate portfolio companies. I've been here for a couple of years now, and when I joined just a couple of years ago, there was very, very little in the way of learning and development. And so that was a brand new challenge for me coming in, building things from the ground up. Prior to that, as Stephanie mentioned, I was the head of learning at Deloitte Global for a few years. I was at Deloitte for 18 years. I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Northwestern University. I'm part of the School of Education and Social Policy, so I'm part of the faculty at the Masters of Learning and Organizational Change.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bob. It's very helpful, and it's great to get to know the both of you a little bit. We had a chance to discuss last week and even right before this call. It turns out each of us have majored in a foreign language or a second language for us. Stephanie and I both majored in Spanish, and Bob is a French major in college. So hopefully, it looks like we have an audience here that is global, and the presence is there, and we've all had experience in multiple cultures. And so it's great to have everybody here. Thanks for all joining. Given today's topic, talking about upskilling and reskilling, especially in the hybrid workforce, we've all been forced into the remote space. I know a lot of companies had tried to do this for many, many years, and some of them were very successful, and others tried and failed, and so just gave it up. And then COVID forced us into this place in the world where we had to be remote. And so what I'd like to find out a little bit is, as the shift happened in your organization, what are you doing internally to address, based on COVID and situations that we have, what are you doing to address upskilling and reskilling today? So that's question number one. I'll start though, Bob, if you just want to give us, so everybody on the call, we're kind of on the same page as to what reskilling and upskilling means. Let's just give those quick definitions, and then we'll go into what is the organization doing to address those two things.
Sure, Ben, and thanks for not putting a time limit on this next question, because in our preparation for this call, so Stephanie, Ben, and Ashley and I, we were going back and forth on what this could really mean, and actually we probably spent about 15, 20 minutes defining it. But so I just wanted to share, like, a commonly known definition about reskilling is really thought of as something that's new. It's a different skill that allows you to move into a completely different job. So that's reskilling. Upskilling is more a macro look at things. So it's really looking further down the line so that when you're tapped for a new role, that you're ready to do it. And where we really landed is that reskilling and upskilling is something that we should all be doing on an ongoing basis, not waiting until your role is suddenly being automated or it's been outsourced, or the skill set that you have is no longer relevant. So that's on the individual level. But then it kind of comes down to what is our role as learning professionals to help the organization really think about not only reskilling on a daily basis, but making sure that they're also looking much further down the line to anticipate the change that's coming. And I hope, Ben, we'll get into a conversation about what's the future of work, how is technology going to disrupt things? Because if we're not thinking about that today, by the time that it does disrupt us, and it's not if, it's when, it'll be too late. So a lot of our roles and the seats that we sit in is helping the organizations really think about that future need for reskilling and upskilling. But most of our time, unfortunately, is spent on the day-to-day.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate the clear definition too, because they're similar and sometimes they are conflated, and I like distinguishing the two. Stephanie, over to you. I'd like to understand, one, how you either go along with those definitions, or maybe you have a slight different interpretation, but how do you feel about those definitions?
No, we agree.
Yeah, good. And
I would add, I would layer.
Go ahead. Yeah, I
would layer a couple things on. I think if you're in an environment like we are, where it's not about the corporate ladder, some call it the corporate lattice, we call it a jungle gym. We want people to be able to have the entirety of their career with us in a relatively small organization. And that means we need to be in the business of upskilling and reskilling all the time. to enable people to move in the direction of their career ambitions. I think there are a number of tools that help with that. LinkedIn Learning, Udemy. The way I like to think about the business that we're in is, how do you equip people with the always on demand tools and resources that they need to be able to do their job day in and day out? I can't remember how to do a VLOOKUP or a pivot table. Well, I really quickly can go and find that, and I'm no longer blocked, and I can execute my task. At the same time, that's not enough. So how do we also make sure that we are strengthening the human component for support for ongoing learning and development on the job every day? And I call this, we're in the business of turning all managers into coaches, so they can observe and they can review outputs, and they can help their employees extract the learning from whatever work they're doing, so the next time they attempt it, they do it better or differently.
Perfect. I like that a lot, especially the all managers as coaches piece. I think in any organization today, really managers need to be coaches, and if they don't have that skill set, it's something they need to develop, and as L&D professionals, we can offer that. To dovetail off of that first question, let's talk about then, given that our workforce is hybrid, and now we understand what reskilling and upskilling means, how is that different today in this remote workplace, and what are things that your organization is doing to address the needs of your population?
Ben, I was just going to jump in and say the reason that we spend so much time really defining that is that defining those two terms, upskilling and reskilling, is that it's never a word that you will hear in your organization. You're not going to sit down with your CEO or your CFO and say, oh, I think I need to reskill my entire organization. You'll hear in the language when you're having that discussion, and that's our roles, really, is to sit down and really to translate the business needs into the needs of the development of their people, whether it's at the organizational level, team level, or the individual level. But I just wanted to put that out there, that we typically don't hear these words, use these words, reskilling and upskilling, but it's our responsibility to help our leaders constantly think about the need to reskill and upskill. But it's an important distinction to make. It's a subtle one to make. But I didn't want anybody to leave this conversation thinking, well, gosh, I've never actually spoken to my leaders or to my managers about reskilling and upskilling, specifically using those two words.
That's very helpful. And yeah, you're right. Those words specifically don't come up a lot in conversation. So what is it that we should be looking for then, and how do we make sure that those messages are being felt across? Because the need is there for upskilling and reskilling. And if those conversations aren't being had, what would your recommendation be to make sure that, one, that they're happening, and two, that they understand the importance of those things?
Yeah, I think the pandemic gave us an incredible opportunity for innovation because we had to. And so for those of us that weren't necessarily thinking about it before, how do we adapt to a world that's changing all the time? Are we being reactive, or are we being proactive? And I think a lot of us were playing catch up as soon as COVID hit. As soon as COVID hit, offices closed overnight, and all of a sudden, everything is now hybrid. Actually, everything is now virtual. Everything's 100% remote. And we had to take a long, hard look at ourselves in the mirror to say, which of our offerings stand out? Which of our offerings need to, as is, good to go? Which of our offerings need to be modulated a little bit? Or which of our offerings we just need to put to bed once and for all? So when COVID hit here at Revansi, one of the first things we did within about 3 or 4 weeks is we actually put out a curriculum on how do we adapt to being in this virtual environment. So we had multiple levels. We had how do you lead in a virtual environment, how do you communicate in a virtual environment, how do you be a good virtual employee. And of course, we had to do that in Zoom. I never heard of Zoom before the actual pandemic hit. So very, very quickly, we had to adapt the delivery, and it couldn't be death by PowerPoint. We had to get familiar with the chat function, with the whiteboard, and make sure that all the strong instructional design fundamentals that are relevant for the live session also carry over to the virtual as well. So that was kind of table stakes. But it's interesting, Ben, when you really think about it, the way that people learn, how people have learned, where people have learned, when people have learned, that has all changed. That has all changed. And we were chatting before this conversation started today about the good old days. I remember running a 7-day in-person leadership development program. 7 days. I now fast forward to today in conversations with my leaders, and they say, hey, Bob, can you do this in 2 hours? In fact, it went from half a day to 3 hours at the start of the pandemic to 2 hours. And now even 2 hours is too much. So I can share some thoughts about what we're doing to get even below the 2-hour mark without taking away from the actual learning that's happening. But there is a huge demand in our time, and that's something that we have to take into consideration.
It's funny, Bob, you mentioned, we're busier now than we were pre-pandemic. A lot of us have recaptured our commute time, but we're using it to work. So we haven't really regained any time. A couple of examples that I wanted to provide to your question, Ben, is the upskilling and the reskilling. An example that I wanted to share about how we are choosing to upskill is the role of the manager. It's always been important. We know that they are the linchpin between strategy and execution. A lot of us have been in the business for years of doing fundamental manager training, milestone schools, et cetera. But the role of the manager became doubly the second the pandemic hit, because they became the literal linchpin in terms of communications. That was the person who was looking after you personally and professionally and spending time with you. So we quickly recognized a need to increase our investment in how we are equipping people managers to engage and develop their teams. So that's an example of an upskilling program. I joined 2 months before the pandemic. So as I was growing and scaling Disco University, everything we were doing was immediately on a virtual platform, which Bob had been doing for years. For me, that was somewhat new. I was very much a classroom gal. So that's an example of an investment we're making in upskilling that we will continue to make. I don't think that's going to go away. We used to call it apprenticeship. Some people don't like that term anymore, but really it's about how are you equipping everyone at every level with the mindset, the skill set, and the tools to be coaching on the job, even your peers, helping people become more independent and increasing their skill set every day. And an example of reskill. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wanted to dig deeper into that upskilling manager.
Sure.
So this program of helping a manager, what are some of the topics that are covered in, or activities, learning activities that you're developing these managers? What are you using, methodology wise? I'm just curious let's go a little bit deeper into that program. And I'm sure Bob has something similar, and I'd like to pick his brain too.
So the content is really the same as what I would have run before. It's really about getting really selective about the format and the tools so that you are engaging participants to make sure that they have the skills, they can practice the skills so they can transfer it on the job, so they can do something better and differently after the program, which is why all of us get paid a paycheck at the end of the day. But it's, we believe that in order to lead other people, you have to be able to lead yourself. So we use a tool to help people deepen their understanding of self, recognize other work styles, and flex to those work styles. We believe people manage, and that's the leadership part of being a people manager. And then we believe that if you continue to try to do the work yourself, you will fail. So you need to figure out what is the work to be done as a team? What do you need to continue to do? And then how do you cascade that work down to each individual on your team to play to their strengths and their development areas? And then how do you create that line of sight back up to the organizational level so they can see their impact, which we know is very engaging? And then lastly, how do we equip our managers through really practical manager practices to engage and develop their employees every day? And we teach the art of the one-to-one, how to give just-in-time feedback, how to grow people for development. And really, really importantly, something that stands out to me during this pandemic is how to help people get unstuck, uncover their strengths and interests, and then match them to a role in your organization or maybe even out of your organization that plays to their strengths during a structured process of career development.
Fantastic. I'm just taking notes this whole time. So I'm gonna follow up with a question after we get to Bob. So prepare for this one. So Stephanie, with those programs, and you said you had to most of the time you would have done that live, and you had to transition to to virtual
Yeah.
because of COVID.
Mhm.
So after we hear from Bob, just prepare for this one. What were the changes that you had to make in order to
Yeah.
adapt it to virtual
Sure.
as opposed to in person? So think about that. And Bob, I want to
Sure.
ask you the same question about upskilling your leadership, whether it was executive or your main level managers. I think you said the individual, your management, and the organization. I think were those the three categories. Am I right that you were talking about?
Yeah, those are the three key buckets for me, Ben. And if I look at the organization-wide level first and foremost, I boil it down to the very bare bones, and human nature plays a huge part of this. So almost with everything that we teach here at Revantage, we start with defining expectations. What does success look like? And so when you boil that up to a learning culture, what does a learning culture look like when we've achieved it? Let's have that conversation with our leadership team. And we can get into the nitty-gritty of, do you set time aside? Do you block Friday off? Do you give 20 hours? I mean, we can get into that level of detail. But at least having a conversation with their leadership team about what are our aspirations around development? What does success look like when we get there? That's not Bob Tweedy saying, here's what we need to do. It's me facilitating a conversation with them. So setting expectations in their mind. So that's kind of one end of the bookshelf. At the other end of the bookshelf is incentives and recognition and rewarding the behaviors of those that do it in line with how we've defined it clearly at the outset. And
Love it.
And by the way, Ben, this boils down to, it's almost like the golden rule 101 for managers, full stop. If you want to be a successful manager, set clear expectations and then reward it appropriately. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in the middle, of course, that we can get into. But if we get those two right, and those two are often the hardest ones and often the ones that are overlooked because we're so bogged down in the deadlines and managing expectations with clients, et cetera, we miss that piece. So that's at the organizational level. And I hear, Stephanie, if you want to jump in here, feel free. I was going to go on and talk a little bit about what we do with our manager population, but I feel like you have something.
The one, did I look like I wanted to say something? I think your example there, learning and development is not going to be successful working in a vacuum. So I think the example you gave speaks to the integrated talent management business that we all need to be in as learning professionals who are using a learning and development toolkit in order to help the business achieve business outcomes.
It's very,
right.
very critical. I like the way you both phrase that too, because L&D can't live in a vacuum. We, in any L&D role, it really is and requires the business buy-in, right, from every area of the business that you're going to be working with. And so relationships with those business leaders is key. And Bob, I like the way you said it, is facilitating conversations with those business leaders to really have them define what learning looks like and what success of a learning culture is within their organization. And that's not really for L&D professionals to define. Hopefully we can influence it, right? Especially as we facilitate those sessions, we can maybe influence and guide them, corral them into a specific area, but really allow them to define it, because once that happens, their buy-in is typically there, and then you'll have their support as long as you're working in step, like you said, Stephanie, making sure that business outcomes are being driven as a result of the learning that's happening. I love it.
Right.
And it's for those of you on the call that have been recently in an interview for a learning position, I guarantee you've been asked the question, how do you measure learning? How do you measure that if we invest in you, your time, your team's time, and all the other time that we spend collectively as an organization, how do you measure it? And my first response is, that's not my responsibility to determine how we measure it. It's my responsibility to help us collectively measure it. But I don't know your business as well as you know your business. So why don't we have the discussion around what success looks like, and then we'll figure out together what that metric looks like. I don't go into level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. They don't care. What they want is a partner to sit down and say, we need to measure the success of what we're doing, just like any other investment across the P&L. And it's our responsibilities in Stephanie and I's seats to be able to have that conversation and help them come up with the metric.
That's
so provocative.
So valuable.
You're so
good.
provocative, Bob, in the way you say that. I did the opposite. I created my own evaluation framework and then educated leaders on this is what I think, here are the buckets I think we need to be looking at. Let's figure out what are the correlations, what are the business drivers that we want to be able to show that we're impacting. So it did become a collaboration, but with a straw person at the beginning of the conversation.
And you have to have that theoretical backdrop. It's like anything. If we walk into a C-suite room and say, oh, I think we should use this change management model or this particular model taken from Cialdini in 1991, you'll see very rapidly the whites of their eyes. All of this, Stephanie, I think the point's an excellent one. All of this is just a toolkit for us to be able to draw upon to say, okay, I think what we need here is I'm thinking that we need a level 2 type assessment here. So let's talk to the leaders about the types of surveys that we could run or the types of focus group conversations we can have, et cetera, but we would never come out and use the models.
I want to measure the extent to which people are using what they learned on the job.
100%.
That's great. Well, this is an excellent conversation. I don't want to derail. I would like to get back to...
We might be having another different webinar right now, though, Ben, so you need to get us back on track.
No, we're fine. No, I think this all plays in. I really do. I don't feel like we're off track at all. I do want to come back to the question I posed to you, though, about so all of these changes you had to make for the pandemic, and now as the pandemic is slowly, I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's still here. It's still but we're starting to see companies have, in-person trainings again, and they're back in session. We're seeing a lot of statistics that are saying that companies are going to maintain some remote, right? Not everybody's just going to be 100% back in the office. So I think hybrid is here to stay. I think it's safe to say that for almost every organization that there is going to be a form of hybrid, which means we have to adapt to a virtual instructor-led training model. So what did you have to do? What were the things you had to implement in order to get your in-person trainings adapted to a virtual remote environment?
I would say first of all, it's been a really juicy learning time, I think, for all of us. I think the gift, right? You get to graduate from the lesson when you see the gift. And I think that the gift that we found was a forcing function. We knew a lot of research was out there that said, here's how you need to be doing learning. Everybody flip the classroom. Stop wasting valuable in-person time on things that people can do and should do on their own. Maximize the value of that in-person time together by focusing on highly interactive skills practices, role plays, simulations, et cetera. I think but it takes time and effort to do that kind of conversion if you have an existing catalog that you're working with. The pandemic became a forcing function, and a lot of us had to scramble. We were still onboarding people. So one day you're in the office onboarding people, the next day you're not. We had to scramble to convert a lot of classroom time to other formats. Since then, now we need to take a more critical look at what is the right format for these objectives, for teaching these skills, for these outcomes. And we need to be more strategic and more critical with the choices that we make in order to achieve the learning objectives that we're trying to achieve. I think that's where we are in our journey. We're past the scramble, and now we're into refining. We're exploring things like, okay, if we're going to be in a hybrid world where some people are at home and some people are in the office, what's the best way to do that so we ensure a great experience and great outcomes for everyone, using tools that we haven't explored before to upgrade the experience. And a lot of us internally are in the business of competing with external vendors where they've already made the investment to be able to do this really, really well. And should we just be tapping into some of those great resources out there?
I love it. It's really interesting to see that. And I like how the challenge of COVID that was presented was we were forced into doing something different, but it doesn't, I like what you said is that you actually found that it might even be more successful because you had to really look closely at your materials and your content and say, what is the best way to deliver this content? Is it easier to let the learners do the self-directed stuff on their own time and save that in-person time for the activities that you need conversations and you need people around? I love that evaluation that it forced you into, as opposed to saying, well, this is what we're left with. You went right into what actually is the best model. I love that. Bob, do you have anything to add?
We didn't go right into it.
Oh, sorry, Stephanie. Okay.
We didn't go right. First, we paved the cow paths. Now we're going into it.
Stephanie, I'm glad you raised that, because I thought, well, because I helped a heck of a long time to get there. But, you know, the pandemic has been a really hard time for everybody. I think just adjusting to the new work environment, being forced at home with all the constraints that have gone into it. And not everybody's mind was on the reskilling that they need to do to be successful in their job, or even thinking 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ahead of time. People's brains just weren't there. And so it was a hard time for all of us, yet our businesses kept moving, kept changing. So the skill set of our employees was changing. And so we had to adapt, but we had to take into consideration all these different factors. And of course, when you look at how much time people spend on Zoom, on top of that, you're now inviting them to do some Zoom training. And we've all heard the term Zoom fatigue. And we certainly started to see that probably over the last 6 to 8 months, where we would have quite large attendance on our biggest flagship programs. And then bit by bit, we started to see attendance drop off a little bit. And when we looked at the reasonings behind it, Zoom fatigue was certainly one factor. The other factor that it really forces us to do is that we're really looking for, like Stephanie said so brilliantly, what technologies are we using for the things that technology allows us to do best, and it gives us a maximum flexibility. And then that allows us to really use the in-person, and I use the in-person stuff in inverted commas, for only the things that us as humans can do when we come together. I think in the interim, I'm actually seeing a lot of pent-up demand for in-person. I think we'll be back in the office after Thanksgiving, 3 days a week, and I actually anticipate that we'll be in the office doing in-person training. We just ran our engagement survey, and we started to see a lot of requests in the comments there to say, can't wait to get back into doing training in person. So I don't think we'll have a hybrid training, i.e. there's folks in the room and some folks in the ceiling. I think it'll either be one or the other. And if it is the other, if it is virtual, then, you know, I have just some thoughts on just how we can adapt our current program, which is purely Zoom. There's no pre and there's no post. We didn't even want to go there. But now, and this might be news for some of my colleagues at Insperity, a quick shout out to all my colleagues there. This will be coming your way, hopefully. But we are going to be looking to leverage our learning management system a whole lot more than we have done up until now. And I can't believe I'm saying this publicly, because probably up until the pandemic, I didn't go anywhere near my learning management system. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was called. I used to refer to it as my glorified compliance tracker. But now I truly believe that technology is here. People are used to using that technology. And so we're going to take just to give you a quick example, and I'll try to be brief, we'll take a management program that was 6 modules spread out over 6 times 2-hour modules. And the Zoom piece, which was purely 2 hours, we're probably going to take that down to 1 hour. So we went from 7 days to 1 hour. We'll add on an additional peer coaching, come and bring your own problem, let's talk about it. But those are going to be the only 2 pieces that we'll do in Zoom. In addition to that, we'll use our learning management system to do things like provide an overview of the program via a video. We'll do that one time, we can scale it. Then we'll have people publicly commit to, yes, we're going to reduce the time in Zoom, but you're going to agree to taking advantage of the flexibility that you'll get by doing your pre-work, where, when, how you want. But that's all in your own time. We'll have management reporting capabilities on the back end to see who's doing it and who's not. We'll have the ability to pull reports on who's doing that. We'll have self-assessments that people will take ahead of time. They might want to do it at 7 at night. They might not want to do it during the day. So that's just some examples of some pre, and I can get into some of the things that we'll do post as well. But I realize we're probably getting short.
That's great. No, I think all of those examples are helpful. It reminds me of a time when I was in college, and when I started college, they had just started doing online courses. Online courses at my school were just brand new. And I remember going in person all the time, and then I took one online course, and I was like, man, I really would like somewhere in between, right? I like the in-person, but I don't like the amount of time I had to spend at the in-person. I liked the online, but I wanted at least a little bit more connection with my classmates and the professor. And what happened was my department rolled out a hybrid where instead of doing 5 hours a week in class, they would do 1 hour a week and the rest of it was online. And it was so interesting to see how valuable to me, because 80% of the course was self-directed and I could listen to lectures from the professor that were pre-recorded and I could do my assignments and have discussions. And then we would save that 1 hour a week for valuable class time discussion about the topics. And I think that same concept, it really works in the professional workspace as well. Any of those courses, any of the, like you're talking about these management programs, find the times that really are valuable and spend that 1 hour in person, and the rest of it can be done remote and online and asynchronously. Stephanie, how do you feel about that?
I like to think about the fact that a lot of us, when we get these mandates from the business, we know we don't want to keep people away from their teams, away from their clients for long periods of time. We really need to maximize the goodness of the time away from teams and clients that we have them for. We don't want to try and cram 10 pounds of sugar into a 5-pound bag. So I like the idea of, again, being really thoughtful and strategic about what needs to be in that 1 hour or 30 minutes or whatever you have time together. Make that the jewel box that's perfect. It's small. It's exactly the right size. It's engaging. And then everything else, figure out what are the right other formats for the self-directed learning, the peer learning, the coaching. There's so many modalities that we have to play with that can enrich the experience of a true blended learning program, what we all aspired to back in the day, but now we're actually in that business.
Definitely.
And Stephanie, I agree 100%. And we're certainly not saying it takes 7 days, reduce it down to 1 hour, we check the box and we're done. We know that deep learning takes time. That's why master's degrees take so long. That's why doctors have such a long time to get qualified. We know that deep learning requires time, attention, reflection. And so it's not about reducing, it's about redistributing and making sure that we're tapping into every single aspect of all of our resources in the organization to ensure that we don't drop the amount of learning that we're doing. So we never talk about training. We never talk about, let's go and set up a training program, because training kind of means that we're going to be in class and it's on Zoom or in person, and that's it. If you think about all the other things, and Stephanie, you touched on a couple, it's access to experts. We know people want access to experts. Let's maximize and optimize the time that we give people with real, true subject matter experts. Peer exchange and coaching. Peer coaching is critical. Stretch assignments, space to fail, experiences to apply content, assessments, whether self-assessment or an actual online assessment, stimulating content. And e-learning and stimulating content doesn't necessarily go hand in hand. So it's our responsibility to make sure that the content is stimulating. But I keep coming back to this time and time again: manager feedback, manager support, manager setting expectations, managers rewarding behaviors. And it all comes back to that, to me. The final one I would just add is opportunities for reflection. So when we add all these different ways that we know that learners today prefer to learn, how do we make sure that the technology is driving it, but we're also leaving time for the in-person stuff, even if it's...
I like it.
Yeah. And for those who like a more extroverted versus an introverted thinking approach to reflection, again, going back to managers as coaches and training them to help you reflect, to extract the learning from your experiences. I think those two things go hand in hand.
I agree. I'd like to pause for a minute and reach out to our audience and see if there are any questions that we can touch on. We're a little bit past the halfway point, but I'd like to field maybe 2, 3, 4 questions real quick before we continue on with the other part of it. Right after the questions, I want to touch on reskilling a bit and a conversation, some of the articles I've seen about the most important skill in today's workforce is adaptability, and why that's so important, and then how we're reskilling our workforces and preparing them to adapt to the new jobs and new requirements. But before we get to that, let's see if we have any questions from our audience.
Sure, I can share a few with you.
That'd be great.
So one that came up a little bit earlier, which I thought was interesting, is someone said, I love, the all managers are coaches idea, but what if you can't hire the managers with coaching skills? Do you allow for additional time for a manager to learn how to coach, or do you reallocate the individual if they cannot be a successful coach?
That's I can start thinking out loud about that. So we are finding the time. We are asking all of our people managers to go through a people manager program where the skill set, the mindset, the tool set around coaching plays a big role, because we believe so strongly. We may have hired people who don't have that skill set. Some people maybe came from other places where they do have that skill set, but we really want a level set. So it is, like Bob said, we're setting the expectation that to be an effective people manager, you need to have a regular practice around coaching your direct employees. I felt like there was an embedded question there about allowing time for learning, which I know is something that we wanted to touch on as a group anyway. And I saw a question about learning culture that I might kick back over to Bob and Ben on what are the organizational practices around building in, setting expectations, and allowing time for learning on the job, especially when we're also busy in this hybrid environment. Do you all have thoughts on that?
I was going to answer the question about managers as a coach, because I'm particularly passionate about that. So if you don't mind, just real quick on this one, like most of you, I'm sure, we have a module for our new manager training that's all around develops others. And we start that module by saying, welcome to our learning and development team. Because we all know the 70-20-10 model, i.e. 70% of what you learn is on the job, 10% is through training. Training's still important, but if it doesn't work through the manager, then it's not going to happen. And so I think people get scared when they hear the word, oh, now I need to be a coach. Because yes, you can take a 9-month certification, ICF, become a certified coach, but that's really not what we're talking about. What we're talking about are simple skills like, are you able to ask the right questions of your team members? Are you really, truly able to listen to their concerns, listen to their challenges, listen to the feedback that they might bring? And then are we as coaches able to provide experiences that are going to allow them to stretch, take on new responsibilities, do something that's beyond their day-to-day, leverage their strengths, i.e. what gives them energy? And then if we're giving people stretch assignments, are we also closing the feedback loop by saying, you did really well here, and here's what you did well, here's the impact that you had, or, and probably more importantly, here's what I think you could do better next time, and being constructive in your feedback, not to be a jerk, but truly to be seen as being helpful in providing that feedback to someone. So not everybody's born with those skills. There's an interesting conversation about nature versus nurture, but I do believe that we have to set, once again, clear expectations, that is part of somebody's role as a manager.
Definitely.
And of course, we have to reward somebody appropriately.
I like that too. And the organizations I've seen that were most successful in finding managers who were good in their roles was, rather than looking for the highest performer to promote into those manager roles, it was looking for the best team players and those who cared about the success of other people more than their own a lot of times. And I think that in particular is we talk about, like, a lot of people don't have those coaching skills, but a lot of people do inherently. It's those that actually look out for the others first. They have that kind of service mentality where they're focused outwardly on other people's success and are willing to help and look for that. They may not, a lot of times they're not necessarily the top performer. And so I think educating your HR and leadership team around who are the people, what is the skill set of a manager that we require? What do we want in a manager? And let's find that person, as opposed to, well, this person does the job the best. So that's what I've seen a lot of organizations who hire successful managers who are coach managers. So.
And the hybrid world, the remote world, hasn't changed those expectations. It just makes it a lot harder. No longer can we do management by walking about. It was easier just to walk in up to somebody and say, hey, how are things going? Could you bump into them? So it's something that we have to be forceful of and mindful of. And I think as much as we still have a long way to go, I think there's a lot more emphasis on mental health, diversity. Certainly. I think a lot of these have been some great benefits and outcomes of the pandemic because we've been faced with so much. And I'm starting to see managers that are much more in tune with their employees, full stop. And development, the good news there is that development is becoming a much higher in their level of priority over and above just getting the job done. And we're certainly seeing that in our engagement scores.
I see a question here I really like to target. It's not necessarily off topic, but Sander asked a question about redoing programs to make sure that they fit. And she mentions it might be overwhelming. So any suggestions that you both have on small actions that will move the needle, but without overhauling the entire company? You know, based on limited time and resources, what are some small but simple and powerful changes and updates that can be made without feeling too overwhelmed with, you know, changing everything? I love this question.
It's a great question, and thanks to the person that raised it. I agree 100% that it's a really fine line between reducing everything down to micro. We hear a lot about bite size, and there'll be another buzzword coming along soon. But it's not about reducing 7 days down to an hour or even 15 minutes. It's everything else and being mindful of busy periods throughout the year, because certain teams they just don't have time for it. And as much as we want to say, well, you should find time because it's part of your role, it doesn't work that way. So we have to be mindful of it. We have to conversations with leaders and make sure that it's spread out over the year. And also get input on what does a good design look like. So we're intending to say, here's what it looks like in 2021. 2022, here's what it could look like. Give us your input, give us your feedback before we go there. We'll see what the feedback is like. Let me share a quick example of what we're doing for onboarding. We were asked, actually prior to COVID, so the timing was quite nice for us. We were asked to come up with a 30, 60, 90-day toolkit for onboarding all of our new hires. And typically a 30, 60, 90-day toolkit is 3 sheets of, you know, here's a checklist. Here's 30 days, 1 page, 60 days, here's what you do. And we completely flipped that on its head pre-COVID. So we have an app, and I know some people, as soon as you hear the word, we have an app, we see the whites of people's eyes. But we have an app that we created that we have around 50 to 60 different learning resources that a new hire can take. And don't jump ahead here, they're only 1 to 2 minutes each. And we send them out over the course of the 90 days. So we still know what people need to learn from a knowledge, skills, and abilities perspective in the first 30 days. We send that out on the app via notification, and it's every other day. And we layer on the knowledge so that you're building on it. So it's just high level in the first 30 days because we know you're drinking from the fire. But it's on your phone. And don't forget, I work in real estate. So a good example is, here's a glossary of terms on real estate. If you're brand new to our industry, here's a glossary. It's on your phone. Check it out. There's a game. We've gamified it. It's fun. It's interactive. You can comment on it. You can challenge other people. But it's also there if you're in a call 3 weeks later and you come across the term 4 times cap rate. But what does that mean? Pull it up on your phone because you know it's there. So that's just one way to take 90 days worth of content that you would typically get on day 1 and then delete it or put it into a folder somewhere. But we're spreading it out and putting it on your phone because, let's be honest, we're spending 3 to 4 hours of our day on our phones anyway.
I like that. Stephanie, your thoughts. What are maybe some simple things, actionable things that would have an impact that somebody could focus on?
Yeah. Well, let me go broader for 1 second, then I'll come back to the tactical. I think one simple thing to do is get your folks in a room. Get your folks in a virtual room or get them together in person if you can, your learning professionals and your trusted folks in the business, and have that simple conversation about what's working, what's not, what are your biggest pain points, and then just prioritize. I think it really comes down to the fact that we need to be ruthlessly prioritizing. A lot of us are really, really busy, but are we having business impact? And if something doesn't have a business impact, I'd say be ruthless and cut it. And then focus your time on what really is going to move the needle for your people and for your business outcomes. The second thing I would say is kind of an axiom that I learned from a book. I think it's from the book Scaling The easiest way to change a behavior is a simple tool. So when you're looking at that list of priorities, is there a simple reflection tool, or is there an assessment, or is there, a quick mentoring relationship that you could spin up that would enhance what you've already got in place?
I like that. Those are easy things that you can at least look at to begin with. It's really good. We're getting close to the end here. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about reskilling, and Stephanie, I know that was a big thing. There's a question here that I think plays into this from Alyssa. She says, how do you share ownership of individual contributor development with stakeholder leaders, especially at a large scale? And I want to especially bring that into reskilling. So when it comes to reskilling and helping individuals train for those, additional roles and skill sets that they don't have that they might that they're going to need to acquire, how do you share that? How does L&D share that across the board with operational leaders, that ownership of that?
I think this goes back to our point about integrated talent management. This really, to me, speaks to the frontline people managers who have the relationships with the direct reports every day. We now ask our direct managers, we've set an expectation for them to have career conversations with their folks a minimum of 3 times a year. And I believe it's in the space of those trusted relationships where they're going to find out what are the career ambitions of this person? Are they looking to go up, down, or sideways? And then we know, is it a matter of upskilling? Is it a matter of, putting them on a cross-functional project? Or are they really looking for reskilling to move to a different part of the organization, or maybe even for you to have the opportunity to be a net exporter of talent and help get them placed in another organization, maybe with a customer organization? I think a good example of reskilling that to me expresses the definition that I think about with reskilling. It's not always, somebody got laid off and now we need to help them get another skill set so they can go get a job and continue to contribute to the economy. To me, it's about taking a look at adjacent skill sets as well. We had an example of that last year where we've got an inside sales group, and then we've got a sales development group in our sales organization. And we were kind of in the business of hiring off the street for both of those roles. We had a few use cases where some SDRs, some sales development folks had successfully gotten hired into the inside sales roles, but it wasn't kind of a known and structured career path. And we wanted to address that. So we created a reskilling program. We did a skills analysis of both jobs, and then we designed to the gap. And it was a 12-week program with mentors and demo certification and weekly workshops to address the capabilities and the expertise gaps that people needed. At the end of the day, the goal wasn't for them to just get a transfer into that organization, but it was to turn them into viable candidates for that inside sales role that we would otherwise have had to hire off the street for. And just giving the opportunity and the visibility of a career path like that helps improve engagement in the feeder function.
Certainly. And yeah, not to mention retention, right? Because if they see the potential is there for my organization is helping me deliver the skills, develop these skills that I need in that next role, and they're providing a path to that. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but at least the organization is trying to make that easier for the employee, which huge value there. This is really awesome. I know we only have a few minutes left. Let's do this. Let's wrap up. Let's make this a really
be a genius
easy
in
question
60
for both of you.
Seconds.
Yes, genius in 60 seconds. I'm not going to wrap it up. No, I'm going to make you two do it. I'll start with Bob, since you've had the longest minute to relax here. Give us in 2 minutes or so, what are the, I'm not even going to say 3, but come up with a few, 2, 3, 4 most important areas of focus, and try to be as specific as possible. I know that's hard because we love the macro. What are the most 3 to 4, whatever tips you would say, if somebody is really struggling to get their organization on board with this concept of reskilling and upskilling, especially in this hybrid place, where do you start? Where do you focus, and what would be your tips for this individual to get their organization on the right track?
I have 3. And
okay.
There's probably a lot more, but one thing we haven't really touched on today is data. And not all of us are data focused. I'm not particularly a data fan, but I've had to reskill or upskill myself to get a lot more comfortable with data. Because I think too long in the past, learning and development has been seen to be in its ivory tower trying to figure stuff out by itself. Wouldn't it be cool if? Or I wonder if we could do that. Let's look at the next shiny bubble and offer that to the business and see if it sticks. And of course, we know it doesn't. So what data can we take? And there's lots and lots of data out there, learning management system being one of them. Participation on Zoom. Are there times of the day, other times of the week that we have more participation, less participation? So data is key. Number one.
Good.
How are we making decisions based on the data? I guarantee if we take data to our leadership team and say we're making these changes and here's why, you'll get an A+. The second one is somewhat similar to the question that somebody raised earlier around how do we help at the individual contributor level get ready to be skilled for the next future role. And that's the holy grail to me if we can get that right, but it's very, very difficult to get it right. And so the only thing we can do over and above competencies and career pathing, which it's hard for us to do because we have to come back to our talent management, our integrated talent management, like Stephanie mentioned before, but it comes back to the manager. The manager can help you identify a short-term and long-term career path and can get you the opportunities to do it. And then the third one is around conversations with leaders. We cannot do this ourselves. We have to invite them in regularly, understand the business, understand their pain points, and then we bring our expertise, our data, and our support to help them get there.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Stephanie, same to you. Same question.
Well, I'm going to build on my first point is Bob's last point, that I believe our mindset needs to be that we are performance and learning consultants to the business. And that makes our job both easier and harder at the same time. I think putting in place a governance approach doesn't have to be that fancy. It can just be check-ins, but a forum where you hash it all out and you show those great coaching skills. You're a great active listener to the business and you share your expertise in our body of knowledge, which is learning and development, to build credibility is really important. I'm going to go in a weird direction with the second point, but self-care is really important for all of us right now. And that's been highlighted during the pandemic. And when I think about what that means as a learning and development professional, just lots of sparks start to fly. And I'd love to spend another hour hearing all of your thoughts on that. But for me, what that has meant is I have had to create an external network to continue my own learning. You can't lead a learning function like Bob and I do without being a lifelong learner yourself. And when you are the top person in learning, sometimes you need to go external for that. So I think really growing and nurturing your own personal board of advisors in this space is critical.
Wow, I love it. That's really good. I don't think I have anything to add other than I'm glad you both had three different things. There's crossover, but I like that there's multiple approaches, and hopefully those of you who are participating today found at least one of those nuggets to be like, this is somewhere I can start. This is somewhere I can focus right now to take steps. I appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you for joining. Last thing I'll mention here is those of you who are interested in learning more about KLAS and KLAS technologies, our platform is designed to facilitate your virtual training sessions. So anytime you're doing virtual ILTs, our platform is built for higher engagement and better remote opportunities for your workforce. So would love to share that with anybody if interested. And finally, like that, Bob, if you could do a 10-second recap of upskilling and reskilling, just the definitions. We had a question from Taylor. Reskill versus upskill definitions.
Yeah, I got to come back to my notes because remember we had so many discussions about it.
I would say I'll jump in. Upskilling for me is about that up the ladder movement. How are you deepening an existing skill set to kind of move in that singular upward vertical direction? And then reskilling really is about what are the different skill sets you need, either because a part of your job has changed or become obsolete, or because you want to move to an adjacent role, or because you want to move to an entirely different role or organization. And if we're wrong, I'd love to hear from all of you. We debated it for a long time.
Well said.
Yeah, well said. I guess to wrap it up, Ashley, turn it over to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. Thank you all. That was a wonderful discussion. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Again, a special thank you to Ben, Stephanie, Bob for your discussion this afternoon. We invite you all to join us for the next and final webinar in this 4-part series titled Aligning More Strategically for the Future of Learning, which will take place next week, Tuesday, October 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central Time. And this conversation will focus on how the future will require more partnership and collaboration between higher education, executive education, and corporate L&D. On behalf of Talent Management, I wish everyone a safe and productive week ahead. We look forward to seeing you soon, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.